According to a shocking new report from the Washington Post, the plan to challenge the election results for 2020 was actually cooked up in an airplane hangar by a man named Russell Ramsland Jr. all the way back in 2018. And the plan that Ramsland came up with was to challenge the audit logs of the voting machines and voting machine software. Obviously, that would include Dominion and Smart MADEC. Because according to Ramsland, information that he had obtained, those audit logs said there was a 63% error rate with the way the votes were being counted. So Ramsland had a plan. He thought he had the data on his side. However, a university looked into this and they found that that was actually false. So that 63% didn't actually exist. So Ramsland had a plan. He had faulty information. All they needed was a candidate who firmly believed that they won the election, whether it was a House, Senate, local, presidential election, whatever it was. Find somebody who believed that they won that would be willing to go along with this completely idiotic plan. But where are you going to find anybody like that? And we all know who they found. They found Donald Trump. Let me read this part here. This is actually from Raw Story's analysis of it. It contains quotes from the Post here. So let me just read this. It was a coordinated effort among many Trump allies and lawyers. They weren't perpetrated by experts or insiders, as the report explained. It was conservative activists and Trump pals who pushed a company called the Allied Security Operations Group, ASOG, to find the evidence where none existed. Ramsland and others associated with ASOG played key roles in spreading the claims of fraud, said the Post. After fringe Republican Louis Gohmert was briefed by the ASOG, he began promoting the conspiracies. Then they became part of Sidney Powell's lawsuits and Rudy Giuliani's efforts. Fox News had seized on the reports as well, hungry for Trump supporter ratings as the outgoing president attacked the network for calling Arizona for Biden on election night. And the rest is history. So what does this report mean? First and foremost, it means that this is not some kind of unique thing, and it certainly means that Republicans understand that this wasn't a legitimately fraudulent election. Okay, they knew that part's a lie. They've always known it. Because again, this was cooked up 2 years before that presidential election even took place. All they needed were the right circumstances, basically the perfect storm to develop so that they could put their plan into action and see if they could have any success overturning the results of an election. That's what all this was. It just so happened that Trump was the narcissistic jackass who decided he didn't lose. So they looked at this, they talked to his friends, his allies, members of Congress, like it mentions. They got all these people on board with it. And then, of course, Trump himself. Had they been successful, though, that's the scary part. Because think about this for a moment. If they would have started with a lower profile election, one that people weren't necessarily paying attention to, maybe even an election nobody even knew was taking place. But if they could have started small, instead of literally going for the biggest possible election ever, they could have been successful. That's the terrifying part. And if they were successful at the lower level, they would have eventually worked their way up, continued challenging election after election after election until they made their way all the way up to the top. So I don't know what would have happened if maybe somebody in 2018 had signed on to this plan, if another, candidate for office had done this prior to Trump's election. But because they started with Trump, that's why they failed. And again, that's the scariest part about all of this. That was a very high-profile election. There were very real mechanisms in place for recounts, for audits, for all of these kinds of things, where the ballots can be stored, all of that. And because we had those safeguards in place for that particular election, because the entire country was paying attention to it, their plan failed. Had any of those circumstances been different, I don't know that they would have failed. And then they would have worked their way up until they became the ultimate authority on which election was real and which one needed to be overturned. That's what would have happened with this group if they would have started small instead of going for the big one right out the gate.